Hi, I'm Gary Fisk, Professor of Psychology at Georgia Southwestern State University. In this video, what we're going to do is use PSPP to do some basic correlation and regression type analyses. Correlation is for looking at relationships between two variables. A classic public health example has been the relationship between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. Regression is used to make predictions about based on known relationships. And it's very commonly used in the medical field to try to predict who's at risk for certain diseases. Okay, let's use an example here. This example is from my website, PSPP for Beginners. What you can see is I've got SAT scores and grade point average scores. This is a very commonly used example in introductory statistics textbooks. The idea comes from college admissions. When we admit people to college, we're trying to predict how successful they'll be in college. And so we might want to use SAT scores to try to predict what their freshman college GPA is going to be. So this is a very common example. The SAT scores I have here are combined verbal and math scores. And then the grade point average is what we're anticipating students will do. This is known data, right? We've got this from our current students, let's say. All right, so let's do some analyses with these. We've got them set up this way. Let's begin with something small. We'll start by doing a scatter plot. Scatter plots are graphs that have a data point for each person, whereas SAT and GPA scores intersect. We'll put a little dot there to represent each person. If there's a relationship, that cloud of data points will kind of line up. It'll form a meaningful pattern rather than just being a big spread all over the place. So let's try that. If we go to the graphs menu, you can see one of the options from the graphs menu is scatter plot. So we'll select that. Now we've got a dialog box. We have to choose what our two variables are going to be here. I'm going to put SAT scores on the x-axis and GPA on the y-axis. So I can select these and then use the little arrows to move them over. I used SAT for the x-axis because in college admissions, we're going to try to use SAT scores to predict what grade point average is going to be. So the predictor variable usually goes on the x-axis. It's just a convention for how these things work. All right, so I've selected my variables. I used the arrows to move them over to their slots here. I'll click OK, and let's see what we get for an output here. All right, so here's our scatter plot. You can see there's an upward movement as we go from left to right. The scores are increasing. The people with higher SAT scores tend to have higher grade point averages. The people with lower SAT scores tend to have lower grade point averages. All right, so that's nice. Just want to point out, see these labels down here, SAT, verbal, and quantitative GPA from the first year. To get those labels, we really need to set this up in our data file here, right? In the variable view of the data editor, we put up labels for those here, and then those labels show up again in our graph when we graph it out. So if you skip this step here, right, you skip this step, you don't put your labels in. Well, if you don't do that, then you won't get good labels when you get to this point. So that's, again, one of the reasons why it's important to set up our variable values properly before we start doing analyses. All right, so that's a scatter plot. Let's do some more with this. Let's take that away for a moment. I'm just going to switch to the data view. Let's do correlations now with this. We can do correlations are going to give us a score, and the score is going to represent that relationship between the variables. So I'm going to go to the Analyze menu. There's an option called bivariate correlations. The prefix bi here means two, right? So we're going to look at combinations of two variables. Bi is being like bicycle, right? Two wheels. So we're going to look at combinations of two variables. I'll select that option. Again, you see a dialog box. We've got to choose our variables from the dialog. We'll choose as many as you want, and you just move them over here to the right. But that's what's going to be analyzed. We can choose our kind of or direction of significance, two-tailed or one-tailed. We can ask it to flag ones that might be statistically significant. All right, so we'll do that. And let's see what the output looks like then. All right, so here's our output. You can see that it creates a little table. The variables are both in the columns and the rows. And the way to read this is you have to read like the intersection. SAT and GPA are intersecting here at this corner of the table. So it's 0.78. You can see that's a pretty strong correlation. Now notice this one here, SAT and SAT, where they come together, that says 1. What does that mean? Well, a variable is going to correlate perfectly with itself. So what that means is really nothing. We can just ignore that one. It's not really anything informative for us. We should just ignore that. Also, you can see the bottom left corner here just repeats what was in the top right. So we just, we're kind of duplicating. It's just kind of giving us more than we want. Sometimes PSPP and other statistical software packages will give us more information than we really care to know. So this is our R value there, and then we can also see it's statistically significant, 0.001. Okay, so that's a correlation coefficient. All right, let's do one last thing with this. We'll do a regression type analysis. If we know someone's SAT score, can we predict what their GPA in college might look like? All right, so we're going to go to the Analyze menu. There's Regression. We'll choose the linear option. Logistic regression is more advanced. We're going to keep it simple for this video. We're just going to do linear, and we'll bring this up. So again, you see another dialog box where we have to choose our variables. We're going to put SAT score here in the bottom. That's our independent variable. That goes on our x-axis. And then GPA from our first year, that's going to be our outcome. So they call that the dependent variable. Right, so we'll put that over there, right? We had to select them and then use the little arrow keys to move them where we wanted to go. There's some other options in these buttons. We're going to skip those for now. All right, so let's click OK and see what we get in our outputs. Right, if we scroll down, we can see we get a regression formula. It's got R squared here. It's got, the slope values and such like that from it. And it has a t-test for each one of those too. So this is what you'd really want here. Your slope and your y-intercept is going to come out of this. Okay. All right. So that's all there is to it for correlation and regression type analyses. If you have the data set up, you just choose from the menu, select your variables, and then go from there. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.